At 2:14 a.m., my phone emitted a sound I'd never heard a mobile device make before. The screen was locked by a military override. It read, "Primary defense line breached. Do not look at the sky." Then, my bare feet hit the floor. The phone didn't have GPS, but whatever sent that signal was tracking me. They saw the exact second I moved toward the glass. Hello, loves. I hope you've got the doors locked, and you're not listening alone. Welcome to Madam Nightmare. I live in northern Maine. I used to think the scariest thing about living off-grid was the winter isolation. Once the heavy snow hits, the county stops maintaining the secondary login roads. If you stay up here, you are entirely on your own for months. 3 months ago, I learned that being completely alone isn't the worst-case scenario. The worst-case scenario is realizing the outside world remembers exactly where you are, and they are trying to warn you. It happened on a Thursday night. It was just after 2 in the morning. The house was dead silent, except for the rhythmic clicking of the wood stove cooling down. I was lying in bed, right on the verge of falling asleep, when my old flip phone went off. Now, you have to understand something about my property. I don't get cellular service out here. At best, if the weather is perfectly clear, I might get a single, flickering bar of extended roaming network near the kitchen window. But in my bedroom? Nothing. It's a total dead zone. But at 2:14, my phone didn't just ring. It emitted a sound I had never heard a mobile device make before. It wasn't the standard digital chirping of a text message, and it wasn't the loud mechanical blare of an Amber Alert. It was a flat, piercing, dual-tone screech. A frequency so high it made my ears ache. It sounded like an old civil defense siren compressed into a tiny speaker. I bolted upright, my heart hammering against my ribs. The screen was illuminating the entire bedroom in a harsh, cold, unnatural shade of blue. The light was incredibly intense, casting long, sharp shadows across the ceiling. I reached out, my hand trembling slightly, and I picked up the device. There was no header on the screen, no carrier name, no signal bars, and no timestamp. Just a solid gray dialog box overlaying the screen. The text inside was written in a blocky, low-resolution font, looking exactly like an old government telegram printed on a dot matrix machine. It was uneven, with slightly misaligned lettering that proved a human operator had keyed it into an old terminal. The message read, "Military Wireless Override. Broadcast Area. Rector County Sector 4. Emergency notice to registered outposts 1 through 12. Primary defense line breached. Remain inside. Do not look at the sky. Lock all doors immediately." I stared at the screen, my breath catching in my throat. Registered outposts 1 through 12? Rector County is vast, mostly unpopulated timberland. There are maybe a few dozen scattered cabins within a 50-mile radius. Who were the other 11? And why did the military network think my phone belonged to one of them? I tried to press the buttons to clear the screen, but the interface was completely locked by a hardwired override. The text just sat there, burning into the pixels. Then, the ambient sounds of the woods outside completely stopped. If you live in the wilderness, you get used to a constant background symphony. The wind rustling through the pines, the distant crack of freezing branches, the faint calls of nocturnal animals. But in a matter of seconds, all of it was vacuumed away. It was a suffocating, absolute silence. The kind of silence that feels heavy against your eardrums, like a sudden drop in barometric pressure before a massive storm. That's when the light changed. The cold blue glow from my phone screen was suddenly matched by an identical light bleeding through my bedroom window blinds. At first, I thought it was a line truck or a game warden's spotlight. But the light wasn't moving. It wasn't sweeping across the trees. It was projecting directly down from above, casting the perfect, geometric shadows of the window slats across my comforter. It was a deep, electric, chemical blue. It looked like the color of burning copper. My instinct, the basic human curiosity that gets people killed, told me to stand up, walk to the window, and part the blinds to see what kind of massive government aircraft or spotlight rig was hovering above the tree line. I actually pulled my legs out from under the covers. My bare feet touched the cold hardwood floor. I took one step toward the glass. The phone in my hand vibrated again, a short, violent spasm. I looked down. The gray text box had updated. A single new line had been appended to the bottom of the broadcast message. The letters were rushed, containing a glaring typo that showed the sheer panic of the person typing it. It read, "Outpost 12 is moving toward the window. Return to cover." A collective chill ran straight down my spine, freezing me completely in place. The device didn't have GPS enabled. It didn't even have a network connection. But whatever sent that signal wasn't tracking my phone. They were tracking me. A human lookout, stationed somewhere high up in the dark with a pair of heavy, military-grade thermal binoculars, was watching my cabin windows. They saw the exact second my heat signature moved toward the glass, and they frantically punched a manual warning directly into their radio terminal to save my life. I didn't go to the window. I threw myself backward, sliding down against the side of the bed, using the mattress as a barrier between myself and the blue light coming through the glass. I pulled my knees to my chest, staring at the door to my hallway. Outside, in the sky above my cabin, a low tectonic hum began to vibrate through the logs of the house. It wasn't the sound of an engine I recognized, but it was mechanical. The deep, industrial thrum of massive diesel generators or heavy turbines shifting through the upper atmosphere, displacing thousands of tons of cold air. It shook the plates in my kitchen cabinets. For 45 minutes, I sat on the floor in the dark, bathed in that sickening copper light, listening to the sky hum and the heavy mechanical grinding above. I kept my eyes locked onto the floorboards, terrified that if I glanced upward, even by accident, I would see whatever massive military vessel or terrestrial threat was staring down through the skylight in my loft. And then, just as suddenly as it started, the blue light snapped off. The normal blackness of the main night returned. A second later, the wind rushed back into the trees and the distant, normal cricket started up again. My phone screen flickered, went black, and rebooted itself. When the lock screen came back up, it showed the normal home screen. No notifications, no saved messages, just zero service. The next morning, I drove down to the nearest trading post, about 30 miles south, just to see if anyone else had experienced it. The older man behind the counter looked at me like I was losing my mind when I asked about an emergency broadcast. Nobody's phone had gone off. The commercial network had been completely normal. But as I was leaving the store, a guy in a faded canvas jacket, someone I recognized as a veteran fire lookout tower operator from the next ridge over, brushed past me at the doorway. He didn't look at my face. His eyes were bloodshot, his hands shaking slightly as he reached for the door. But as he went by, he muttered 2 words under his breath, just loud enough for me to hear. Outpost 7. I haven't slept with my phone in the bedroom since. And every night, before the sun drops behind the ridge, I make sure every single blind in this house is screwed shut into the frame. Because I know there are 10 other terrified people out there in these woods, sitting by their windows, waiting for the next deployment order. People who get into amateur ham radio usually do it for the community. You sit in your basement or your garage late at night, spinning the heavy plastic dial through the ocean of static, looking for a friendly voice from 3 states over. I've been licensed since 2018, operating out of a tiny valley in rural West Virginia. Because of the surrounding ridges, normal cell signals don't drop down into my property, but my high-frequency antenna can clear the hills just fine. It was a Tuesday in mid-November, right around 1:45 a.m., when the static on the 40-meter band vanished. Usually, when a frequency goes dead, you hear a soft, ambient hiss, but this was different. The speaker on my transceiver suddenly went completely silent, as if the air had been sucked right out of the room. Then, my signal strength meter pegged all the way into the red. Something was broadcasting with massive wattage right from inside my county. A second later, a voice came through. It wasn't the usual gravelly tone of an old hobbyist. It was a flat, sterile female voice, reading from a script. It sounded exactly like an official military emergency broadcast dispatch, chillingly professional and completely detached. The voice said,
Notice of domain reclamation. Federal Geodetic Survey Sector 9 is now under active quarantine. All civilian receivers are ordered to power down immediately to prevent biological resonance. The following frequencies are now property of the Department of Defense. 7.195, 7.200, 7.205.
I reached out to turn the dial, thinking I had stumbled onto some weird military training exercise. But as soon as my fingers touched the plastic knob, the broadcast stopped mid-sentence. There was a heavy click over the airwave, like a physical microphone being keyed by a sweating hand in a damp room. A man's voice, rough and completely out of breath, cut through the speaker. He wasn't reading a script. He sounded terrified.
If anyone is monitoring this frequency, do not turn off your radio. I repeat, do not power down. They are tracking the drops in grid resistance. If you turn your equipment off, they know exactly which house has a listener.
I froze, my hand hovering over the power toggle. The panic in his voice was raw, visceral, and completely real.
My name is Ed.
The radio barked, static tearing at the edges of his words.
I'm a civilian technician at the Ridgeline Repeater Station. We opened a sealed bunker beneath the tower this afternoon. We thought it was an old Cold War fallout shelter. It wasn't. There's a weapon down there. Some kind of experimental chemical or acoustic transmitter that bleeds into the local power lines. If you look at your lights right now, they aren't flickering. They are pulsing.
Instinctively, I looked up at the bare fluorescent bulb hanging from my garage ceiling. My stomach dropped. The light wasn't flickering. It was dimming and brightening in a steady, rhythmic cycle, almost like the slow, heavy breathing of a massive lung.
They are sending trucks down Route 4.
Voice grew tighter, a sharp sob breaking through the radio crackle. They have directional antennas mounted on the roofs. They aren't looking for a signal. They are looking for the houses where the power suddenly gets cut, because that means someone heard the warning and panicked. If you are listening to this, you have to leave your equipment on. Let it run. Let them think the house is empty. Oh God, I hear them on the gravel outside the repeater station. A deafening, high-pitched squeal exploded through my headphones, so loud I had to rip them off my ears. Through the small speakers of the headset resting on my desk, I could hear a chaotic mess of sound. The shattering of a glass window, heavy combat boots, and then a bizarre, low-frequency thumping sound. It sounded like a massive, heavy canvas body bag, or a wet container being dragged across a concrete floor by 3 or 4 men. The rough voice vanished. The clean, pre-recorded dispatch tape snapped back on instantly, rolling right over the noise of the struggle.
Notice of domain reclamation. Sector 9 is clear. Resume standard monitoring.
I sat in my garage until the sun came up, staring at my transceiver. I didn't touch the power switch. I didn't turn the volume down. I just sat there in the cold, listening to that empty taped voice repeat the same loop for 4 hours. The next afternoon, I drove up the ridge to Route 4. The gravel road leading to the repeater station was completely blocked by a brand new high-security chain-link fence. A massive green sign hung from the gate, stating the area was now a restricted wildlife sanctuary. But through the trees, I could see 3 black utility trucks parked outside the transmitter building. None of them had license plates. And mounted to the top of the repeater tower was a massive gray, unmarked metal cylinder that definitely hadn't been there the day before, a heavy-duty signal dampener. I left my radio equipment running when I came home. It's still running right now in the basement. I'm too terrified to find out what happens if I turn it off. When you work commercial excavation, you learn that the ground under our feet is a complete mess. Every county has thousands of miles of old, forgotten infrastructure, abandoned clay sewer pipes, obsolete copper phone lines, and private water mains that never made it onto the official city blueprints. Usually, if you hit something unmapped, you just call the foreman, patch it up, and keep digging. But 2 weeks ago, I dug up something that wasn't meant to be found. And the response it triggered proved that some things are left off the maps on purpose. I was working a private contract out in western Oregon, clearing a 5-acre plot of heavily forested land for a client who wanted to build an off-grid homestead. It was a solo job. Just me, a 20-ton hydraulic excavator, and the deep silence of the timber forest. Around 3:30 in the afternoon, the excavator's bucket hit something solid about 8 feet down. It didn't feel like bedrock, and it didn't have the sharp, metallic ring of a water main. It was a dull, heavy thud that vibrated straight up through the joysticks and into my arms. I reversed the hydraulics, cleared away the loose, wet clay with a hand shovel, and climbed down into the trench to see what was blocking the progress. Buried in the dirt was a thick, seamless slab of dark, matte gray material. It looked like high-density bunker concrete, but when I touched it, it felt completely wrong. It was freezing cold, far colder than the surrounding earth, and the surface had an incredibly fine, oily texture to it, like polished slate. But the detail that made me freeze was the industrial stamping. Imprinted directly into the center of the gray slab was an official federal seal, weathered but completely legible. United States Interior Department, Underground Disposal Unit 4B. Unauthorized excavation carries a penalty of mandatory detention. Below the text was a deep, hand-engraved number, crudely chiseled by a worker decades ago. 412. I took a step back, my boots sinking into the wet mud. There were no public utilities out here. This plot was miles from the nearest town. Before I could even climb out of the trench, the heavy cell phone in my pocket vibrated. I pulled it out, assuming it was the property owner checking in. It wasn't. The caller ID was completely blank, just a row of 7 zeros. I swiped answer, and before I could even say hello, a sharp, authoritative human voice cut through the line. The man sounded exhausted but deeply intense, like a security officer who had just thrown on his headset in a panic.
Operator 4. Step away from the bucket immediately. Return to the cab of your machine, shut down the engine, and wait for escort.
I looked around the empty clearing. The dense pine trees stood completely still under the gray sky. There wasn't another living soul for miles. How did anyone know I had just uncovered the slab? "Who is this?" I asked, my voice cracking slightly. "Is this the county clerk's office? I'm on a private contract."
This is a federal enforcement directive.
The man's voice replied, perfectly flat and chillingly calm.
Ground pressure sensors have flagged physical impact with Vault 4B. If you breach the physical seal of that slab, the environmental contamination will be irreversible. Return to your cab. Do not look down into the trench.
The line went dead with a heavy, mechanical click. A sudden, overwhelming wave of panic hit me. I didn't go back to the cab. Instead, I scrambled up the muddy clay wall of the hole, ran straight past my idling excavator, and jumped into my personal pickup truck. I threw the truck into reverse, tearing down the dirt logging road as fast as the suspension could handle, leaving my expensive machinery sitting completely abandoned in the clearing. As I reached the main highway, 3 unmarked matte black heavy transport vehicles passed me going the opposite direction. They didn't have sirens, but they were moving at a terrifying speed, their roofs mounted with massive, industrial satellite dishes, communications arrays, and heavy manual winches. I didn't go back to the site for 3 days. When the property owner finally called me, his voice sounded entirely different, hollow, quiet, and deeply shaken. He told me the contract was canceled, that the county had suddenly seized the land under an emergency eminent domain filing due to a critical geological instability. He told me to just send an invoice for my time and forget the coordinates. But I couldn't just forget it. Yesterday, I pulled up a public satellite mapping program to look at the coordinates of that clearing, just to see what they did to the land. The clearing isn't there anymore. The entire 5-acre plot, along with the logging road I used to get there, has been completely redacted on the public map. The government had submitted a forced emergency update to the map providers, replacing the entire area with a seamless blurred block of generic green forest. If you didn't know the road existed, you would never guess anything had ever been built there. They didn't just bury whatever was under that slab. They erased the entire piece of earth from the public record. And every time I close my eyes, I keep thinking about that number stamped into the cold, oily stone. Vault 4B, Unit 412. If a human government is willing to erase a whole forest to hide one unit, what is inside the other 411? If you made it through tonight's collection, pass it on to someone you want to keep safe, or maybe someone special you'd like to haunt. Don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss our next nightmare. Until next time, loves, stay safe and sleep well.